Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Tim and Jim Show, where we discuss all things marketing, public relations, and entrepreneurship to help grow your business. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Tim Sohn of Sohn Social Media Solutions, and I'm here with my co-host, Jim Fuse, who is, where are you today, Jim?
Today, I am in Marietta, Georgia, and we're delighted to have Lori Rochino with us here today. She stumbled upon podcasting 2 years ago, and she's been hooked ever since. She's created this Simply Designed Life podcast for entrepreneurs who want to simplify their busy lives in order to make room for the things that matter, which don't we all? She's a podcast and productivity coach with a corporate marketing background for financial services and startups. So Lori, thank you so much for taking the time today to join us. So today you're going to talk to us about how to start a podcast. But first, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what got you into podcasting.
Yeah, sure. So like many, I graduated from college and worked 9 to 5 in corporate marketing, as mentioned in my bio, for about a decade. And then my husband and I did the whole long distance thing. I was a New York City gal. He was a Boston guy. And then, we decided to get married and I relocated up there. But once we decided to start a family, we did relocate once more and get the house in the suburbs. And we decided to become closer to family. So now we're about an hour and a half west of the Philadelphia area. And so I stopped working in corporate marketing and decided to move into the freelance area. So I was doing a lot of freelance copywriting and content marketing work, but I also got into coaching and podcasting. And what I found, why I decided to go into podcasting is I got a little frustrated with the medium because as much as, you get you put your message out there, I didn't really feel like I connected with a lot of the readers. And there's like something more intimate about the podcast medium. So I decided to check that out. And I also knew that I had a little bit more of a message. So, that book, The 4-Hour Workweek, which is something that's read in a lot of entrepreneurial circles. I basically wanted to take what Tim Ferriss had said and make that accessible for everyday folks, like people with families and jobs and, who can't necessarily go race motor car racing in Argentina or whatever, but might want to do it more scaled to what works for them, that sort of thing. And so that's how I got started with the podcasting. And from podcasting, I've been able to help coach women entrepreneurs get started with their podcast medium. A lot of them already have blogs and content that are existing and just need a different outlet and they want to get in front of a new audience. Also got into productivity, which ties in with the whole Tim Ferriss, simplifying your life and creating the Simply Designed Life podcast show. And really, it was about the connection with the kind of people that I wanted to connect with, were the bloggers, the entrepreneurs, the people who were not necessarily part of the status quo. I don't have anything. I don't think there's anything wrong with the status quo. I mean, hey, we have to put food on the table, but on the other hand, I think there are also different ways of perceiving things. So I think that my biggest thing was just the connection with people who thought outside of the box, if that makes sense.
That's very cool. Thank you so much for being on the show, Lori. We had met at a conference, the Build Your Influence Summit or Boost Your Influence Conference, or I don't know what it was. But anyway, so there's so many options out there in terms of social media, and there's blogs, there's Facebook Lives like this, there's podcasts. Why should a small business owner and others start a podcast? What is the benefit of having a podcast?
It really depends on what that business owner wants. I know for me and some of my clients, a lot of my clients are also in the writing content marketing space. A lot of them and myself were tired of the whole blogging and writing thing, and even video to some extent. I don't know. I think it's one of those things where you intuitively are either going to like podcasting or you're going to hate podcasting. Because like I mentioned before, the cold connection thing, I wasn't really feeling it as much. And then with video, I get distracted with video, and like even now, like as we're doing it, I think it's great, but I could pay attention to you, but at the same time, I'm also looking at your background and like all these other things going on. Whereas like if you were to take a podcast, you're in people's earbuds, right? You got those Apple headsets, or you're in your car. Most people listening to podcasts are either in their car on a commute listening to like John Lee Dumas hating their corporate job and want to do what he's doing, or they're like running or walking or doing errands or like doing stuff around the house or doing dishes. And you have like while you're doing one thing, you're also super focused on just what that person is saying and the message. Whereas if you're reading a blog post, your eyes are meant to scan. They sometimes just scan for the headings or anything that's bold or anything. Nobody reads long form blocks of text unless they have a deadline and they really need that for something specific. And then, okay, so that would be like for the written one, is just like, yeah, it's hard to just stay focused on that. And some people will have like 5 or 6 different tabs on their browsers and stuff like that. So I think with the podcast, you can like focus just on what the message is. So you have the podcast listeners' full attention. So yeah, those would be a couple reasons why. Also, there's like an intimacy to it, because when you hear someone's voice, it's part of the whole know, like, trust factor, right? People buy from those they know, like, and trust. And when you're putting out content that's written, you don't even know if they're paying attention to it. They might read the headline, or they might read your email headline and then like click on 2 things and then they go away. Something else will catch their attention. Whereas if you can like get the right podcast listeners, somebody who just loves podcasts, and and another thing, to not to go too far ahead, but a lot of podcast listeners are also, they're pretty loyal in comparison to blog readers, and for obvious reasons, because sometimes you can get sucked into these shows, like whether it be Serial or the Tim Ferriss show or whatever. You just start hearing that one person's voice, and they just, it just starts becoming part of your routine. So I hope this makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, along those same lines, Lori, it seems like there's more and more products coming out to do the audio. I mean, even on Twitter now, you can do audio tweets. And for some of these platforms, I'm still trying to wrap my head around, like, would somebody actually listen to something I said on a tweet versus a video? But I definitely agree with you. I know I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm driving, because I think you feel like, okay, I can learn something, connect with something, as opposed to just listening to music or the news repeating itself over and over. So I think that's a great. Tim, you had another question for her, didn't you too?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm good.
Well,
go.
What do you think are the advantages or the disadvantages of doing a podcast, Lori? And why do you think people have been hesitant to start?
Well, one of the main advantages is just the fact that I think it's still a less crowded space. By 2020, according to Statista, there's already going to be 30 million blogs. And there are only 400, well, relatively speaking, there are about 400,000 podcasts, of which only 60,000 are active. So you're comparing, if you're comparing blogs, which if you're going to start a blog today, it's almost going to be like a needle in a haystack. Whereas if you were to start a podcast, there's still a chance that you're going to be found. It's still crowded, but it's not that crowded. So I think that's one of the biggest advantage. And if you get past episode 7, you're in luck, because you're no longer a hashtag pod fade statistic, because most podcasts, most podcasts just don't get past episode 7. Life happens, people get busy, and it's really tough to continue doing something over and over again. So by that time, a lot of people just give up. So I think, like, basically, if you're not flaky and you're consistent, you could pretty much do a pretty good job in the podcasting space. It's also a good way to get in front of a new audience, because there was a statistic I saw somewhere that blog readers and podcast listeners, blog readers don't necessarily listen to podcasts. And not all people who listen to podcasts necessarily read blogs. I think they'll, dip a foot in here and there, but for the most part, they're in their own little verticals. So you can really get in front of a different audience. And usually, according to Edison research, a lot of podcast listeners have a higher income level. I think like the household income is about 200K, and they're very loyal. And when they like your show, they really like your show. So that whole loyalty and that know, like, and trust factor is a huge advantage, as opposed to people who might like read a blog post again and then just like jump right off. The other advantage is that, you could definitely monetize. One of the ways is like either the front end or the back end. So if you wanted to go the traditional ad route, you could definitely get sponsors onto your show. But the other thing you could do is you could also promote and sell your own services, or build your list. A lot of people do a lot of list building strategies via the podcast. And I think there's also like, what is it? Was it lead digits with, what's it called? Lead magnet. Oh, I can't think off the top of my head, but it's like one of the. There's also like a lead magnet solutions that you could use with the podcast. Like for more information, just go dial 555 Sunshine or whatever, and then they just type it in, and then that'll get you into their through your sales funnel. Yeah, I don't know this.
Right. I've done a couple of subscriptions like that on a podcast where that gave me more information by texting a code while I was listening, which is sometimes easier than trying to go into a website. Yeah, that's awesome. And so along with that, how have you seen podcasting help you as a business owner?
I think it helped me in a lot of ways. I mean, I guess like many who are thinking about starting a podcast, I feel you, because I didn't even know whether or not I wanted to do a podcast. I think I saw my coach, the coach that I was working at a time, she launched her own. And at first I was like, ooh, it's going to be like really scary and technical, but she made it really accessible. And so I thought, oh, well, if she can do it, then why don't I try it? And so, I just started, and I got this really inexpensive Snowball microphone. I think it was like $50 or $60. And of course, like, I was very hesitant to even get started. Like, nobody who starts this likes the sound of their voice, especially when you play back and listen to it. I don't know how it is for live stream, but like, I think it just, for whatever reason, I don't know. It's just like this visceral, like, nails scratching a chalkboard type feeling when you first like listen to your whole voice played back. After a while, you get used to it. So I think my biggest thing would be like a personal development thing, and getting used to the sound of my voice and it not having it be so scary anymore. Because like, if I didn't even do this, I don't think I would be in this live stream with you guys. I think I would have failed altogether, because it's like, I hate the sound of my voice, but a lot of people do. Nobody like starts off the bat loving this, So I think it was like more of a progression. So I started out not knowing whether or not I'd like it or not, but as I just stuck with it for whatever reason, and then learned that there were more opportunities in it. And the other thing I did too is I started going to conferences, like podcasting conferences, like Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference, which is like right outside of Philadelphia. I think it's in Swedesboro, New Jersey. And then I went to Podcast Movement, which is in Philly this year. And you just learn so much about how people like, use their shows for their own businesses. And I think it helped me grow in that, like, yeah, it would be great to get like, all these amazing sponsors all the time, but you don't have to do it that way. What I think the biggest thing that I learned is there are multiple ways to either monetize or like grow your, like, either your social media following or your email list or what have you. There are different goals that you can set for yourself. And, it depends on what you want to do, and it can happen. It doesn't have to be one way. So I think those were the biggest ways that I've learned. And the other thing too is just like kind of evangelizing it, because like before we started talking, I'm like, should I go back to the beginning and tell people what a podcast is? Because a lot of people might not know what that is unless I explain to them that it's basically internet radio that's on demand. It's tough to get the concept unless like you show them the telephone and say it's that purple app and it says Apple Podcasts or Podcasts on there. You know what I mean? So there's some of the things that I've seen some growth.
That's great, Lori. You're providing lots of great valuable information for our viewers here. So those of you that are tuning in, we're here today on the Tim and Jim Show with Lori Rochino, and we're talking about how to start a podcast. So if you guys have any questions, please put them in the comments down below. And we encourage you to hit the share button and or tag your friends down below in the comments. So Lori, talk to us a little bit in terms of getting started, in terms of any equipment or software we need to get going.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it depends on what commitment level you're at. You're either going to be like a weekend warrior, tinkerer type, which is kind of what I was when I first started. I just had the Snowball app and just like my laptop. Some of the software you can use is there's Adobe Audition, but there's free ones too, like Audacity. There's Ecamm Recorder. There's also some people will just and people will talk to each other on Skype or Zoom. Zoom is great because it does both video and audio. So it's just like 2 for the price of 1, and it's like free for the first 40 minutes or so. So you can have like an audio file right away if you wanted to. So that's if you wanted to take the route of recording. So just use the software and the mic. And the starter microphone would probably be this ATR 2100. So I've heard somewhere that it sounds like a Heil Pro, which is like the higher end microphone, but it's like $70 on Amazon, and I got it with this pop filter boom arm, which I don't know if you could really see it here, but it's something that you can pretty much connect to your desk, and then it's just plug and play. You could just well, I have like a Mac, and but I'm able to connect it that way. So that's one of the ways is just get your microphone, get the software. It doesn't have to be fancy. You could just start with free audio software. You can even use GarageBand. I started with GarageBand, but I didn't like it after a while. Then I upgraded to the Adobe Audition. And then from time to time, I'll use, I'll go between Skype and Zoom. Skype was great for a while, but for some reason I'd get a lot of feedback. So then I'd go into Zoom. And so you can play around with a lot and see what works. And just know that there's not one solution, because it also depends. If you're doing an interview show, you don't know if their connection's going to be great or not. So, I mean, it's one of those things where you might think you know everything. And I've done this before. I have my little standard operating procedures of everything that I need. But, I think you just have to be really flexible too. Depending. Now, if you're really, really tech averse and you're just I don't want to deal with any of this stuff, I don't want to spend any money, there's this great app here called Anchor. Go to your phone, go in the app store and just type in Anchor. And you don't even have to get a microphone. I've tested it when I was at a conference before and just started talking. I just hit the publish button and then just started rambling on. And it does a good job. I mean, it's not something that I would rely on necessarily. It's one of those, you don't know if it's going to be around long enough or whatnot, but it's something that you could try and test and see. Do you like recording? Do you like hearing yourself? Do you like hearing yourself talk to other people? Is this a medium that you love, or is this a medium that's just oh gosh, I don't know? So it's a great testing ground if you want to use Anchor. So I would probably start with Anchor. And then if you want to get a microphone, I wouldn't spend more than $50 or $60. Something like Blue Snowball, something like ATR 2100, and you don't even need the boom arm and all this stuff. Just get those, just get started and just start talking and start getting used to hearing your voice, hearing your message. And if you already have content, all you have to do is read your blog posts and then just post the audio and add that to your files and then just see what kind of response you get.
Well, I think that's a great point. We're talking, when you ask the question, so, what are ways that people can get content for their podcast? You just hit on one. And what are maybe some of the other areas where we could develop content for our podcast? And also, is there, in your mind, an ideal time length for a podcast?
As far as content ideas, it can run the gamut. If you want to do it, and it depends on your business model too. If you're about promoting your stuff, you want to sell everything you got, you want people to know exactly what you do, then by all means, I would take your best customers and have them on your show as your guests. And they can be a testament to the service that you provide. I mean, obviously you're not going to pitch them yeah, buy my stuff. More go into storytelling mode. Why exactly did you come to me? What was your problem before you came to me? And then what was the solution after we worked together? And have things been beneficial to you? So that's one way if you're a small business owner and you want to showcase your services. The other thing you could do for content is basically like see what's going on in the world, and maybe use that to, if you want to attract influencers, like better, like, some high profile experts on your show. You can get like some research-based items, or you can approach somebody and say, hey, I read your book. Congratulations on being the New York Times bestseller. My audience would love to hear more from you on this. And you can use it as like a, way for them to like come onto the show and help grow both your audiences in a lot of ways, because they'll be, you'd be surprised. You'd think a lot of these guest experts, especially the ones with high profile names, wouldn't want to come to your show, but I've been pleasantly surprised a couple of times when people were actually like, yeah, I'll be on your show. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, cool. So that's another thing that you could do. And okay, what was the other question? I think I went on a tangent.
How the actual length of time for the podcast? I mean, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, 15 minutes. I mean, what's your thoughts there?
My thoughts, okay, when you're starting out, I would probably just make it like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You don't want to like scare yourself silly and have to like, especially when you're starting out, there's probably going to be that tendency to kind of over edit just a little bit. So I would probably start really small, even 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I think I did that with like the very first 1 or 2 episodes, but as you get more comfortable with the medium, you can increase it. So I think it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes is about average. But it really depends on your show and the audience, because they do run the gamut. You've got the Tim Ferriss shows that are like 2 hours plus. Seth Rogen, I think, does the same thing. His art's really, really long form, really, really long, but that's what their audience likes. And then you got like, people that do the dailies like John Lee Dumas, where it's just like every day, like 15-minute episode. But there's also, I don't know if you've heard of Mark Asquith, who's like the 7-minute mentor, but he does a daily that's only 7 minutes. And it's just like 1 tip a day. So it really runs a gamut. And to answer your question, Jim, there's no tried or true. I think it really depends. But yes, standard wise, it seems like a lot of people are going in the 30 minute, 45, 1 hour at the most, but not many people go 2 hours. Not many people go too short. And I think the people that do the really, really short ones might do YouTube or live stream like what you're doing.
Okay. And do you find, have you repurposed your podcast at all in any way on any other sort of mediums outside of what you're doing to get more folks to your podcast?
I've done that for like some guest posting. So if I'm going to be on somebody, if it's like a last minute thing, I might like just kind of look through some of my episodes and check the show notes, and I can like copy and paste some of the things that I have. Obviously, I'm not going to copy it and paste word for word, but I'm able to take like the nugget of that idea and transfer it to somewhere else. The other thing would be for speaking, because like, let's face it, do you want to do another presentation for each place that you go to? Not really. So I've kind of learned how to create, and I'm still creating like that Swiss Army knife type template where, for different people, you'll have your main message, but depending on who your audience is, you can kind of cater it. And I think that's made things a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. So once you start your podcast, how do you get people to find it? You want people to listen to it. How do you get people listening, an audience?
I think the easiest way is like, if you already have a social media following, start there. And if you have an email list, start with the people who are on your list. But I think the biggest way for me had been by having guests on my show and leveraging their audiences, because then most of the time, if they're good about it, they'll share with their audiences. And then, it's like kind of a win-win situation. They get in front of a new audience, but you do too, So I think that was probably the biggest one for me. And I think the other one is just really just, I think it's consistency, because when I noticed when I did stop, and it was pretty obvious I went on vacation for like maybe 1 or 2 months, I noticed like a drop down. So it's like, okay, get back on the bandwagon here. So I think, the best way is consistency. And if you're starting out, I would definitely, if there's somebody who has a much larger audience than you, I would get those people, those guest experts on your show, so you can grow your audience that way.
That's a great idea. So how long does it typically take to create a podcast, Lori? And do you have any productivity hacks for us?
It depends. To get a podcast up and running, if you used Anchor, that could be done in less than like 2 to 3 hours. Just start talking to it. into the app and then press the publish button, and it gets distributed into other distribution outlets like Spotify. I think it gets into iHeartRadio as well, and a couple other places, Apple Podcasts. If you're going to go the traditional podcast route where you have 3 different phases, can I back up a little bit here? So you're going to have like 3 different phases: the pre-production, production, and post-production, where there's probably going to be like multiple steps in each of those 3 different categories. Pre-production would be like deciding what format you want your show. Do you want it to be, solo or interview? And how long do you want it to be? Let's just say, in this case, if you're starting it, let's just say 10 minutes, but we're going to be really consistent and do it every week, 10 minutes a week. Fine. So that's like the pre-production. And then you have if you're getting guests, I would definitely get a calendar scheduler like Calendly or Acuity, because they'll just make it way easier to schedule and reschedule, because let's face it, life happens. So you want to be able to be organized and, not feeling like a headless chicken. So get organized, get a scheduler if you're going to have guests on your show.
We should do that, Jim. Sorry.
And then, of course, you're going to record the podcast. So, and you could do it like obviously via Anchor or like one of the software solutions mentioned. And then we got the fun part, which is a post-production, which is like the 30 steps that you're going to have. And they're not rocket science, but there's a lot of them. So, I mean, if depending on, I know there's like people on 2 different sides of the spectrum, people who are like, I don't have time, I have a life, I am not going to edit at all. And it's perfectly fine. Some people just don't edit their podcasts at all and will just have every and and every like pause and like dog barking, life happening. That's just their thing. that works out. But I think for my shows, I tend to edit. I used to over edit, but I try not to over edit anymore. I do let some ums and ers come in every now and then, because that's how people normally talk. But if there's something that's going to be jarring for the listener, or the message just isn't going to come out right, I think I might tweak here and there. But for the most part, just let 70% good enough is 70% good enough. I think that would probably be my number 1 hack. And then, you're going to have all these other things that you do. Like, you're going to, if you're worried about sound quality, you can get like a leveling software like Levelator, auphonic. They'll help with some of the sounds, because some of the sounds from your end versus like your guest experts end might be different. So what it does is it levels the sounds so that it sounds more consistent. It will reduce like the just like some of the feedback. Like, I mean, obviously, if there's a loud lawnmower in front of your house, it's not to get rid of that. You're going to have to like do a little bit more tweaking that way. But for the most part, it does get rid of a little bit of like the minor white noise and stuff like that. And then you got like the tagging. You got to, in order to be found, I use the PA tag editor or something like that. And it would just like pretty much have like your show title, the description, and then like, the copyright information that you also include before you get published. And then you also have to consider artwork. So like if you're publishing a book, people want to, people are attracted to like whatever appeals to them. So with the podcasting, our cover is really important. And I know Apple Podcasts had like strict stipulations that it has to be a minimum 1400 by 1400. Were the dimensions, and it's suggested that you don't go too crazy with the art. Go more simple, like a bold, like a highway sign, and just use very simple lettering that people can find easily. Because you have to think it from the perspective of the user. They probably see like a ton of different like artwork cover, and they'll probably go towards like the simplest ones, or the ones that they can read easier, as opposed to like all these ornate scripty looking things. So you want to keep that simple. And then I think, depending, some people will use like a podcast, like a full service website. I think there's podcast websites that does that. There's like TalkShoe, but like if you already have a website or like I use a WordPress website. I guess some people might have like Squarespace or whatever, but you'll probably have some plugins that you add to that, like that. And then once you plug and play everything, then you press publish on your end. I know is this a little over the people's heads? I'm sorry if that's too much information, but that's basically the process. So that's going to take way longer.
No, I think that's some great points. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, and that would be more of the post-productions. And then you got the promotion part too. Like you mentioned, how do you get it in front of people? So it's going to have to go through the social media channels. So you promote on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or some people might even have a webinar about their podcast. I've seen that done before. Like, hey, we're launching this. We'd like you to, and some people build buzz around that, especially if they want to get into the new. I've heard that this new and noteworthy thing. I hear like mixed things about it. I hear, for the most part, it's just nice to have, but it's not necessary. But I know there's a lot of people that really want to get their download numbers up so that they can hit that benchmark. So, yeah.
Right. Jim, go ahead and take the next question.
Yeah, Lori, final question from us today. So what are you
promote their things, and it's a win-win situation? I think those are the people that you could probably like have conversations with about possibly like having a relationship where you could do bliss building, and also they might be able to help out monetarily as well to get this thing going. So that's one way to do it. So you could get like traditional sponsorship. You could also do affiliates. So if you have like affiliate products or your guest expert or whoever you associate with that, you know, would help your brand and you'd be able to help their brand. You could also use the affiliate model. I think the best person to talk to about that would be Jessica Kupferman. She's like one of the head of the She Podcast Facebook group, because she goes into probably more detail than I could about developing sponsorship relationships on the front end, because I think my experience is more the inbound marketing back end, where we'll just provide valuable content, valuable insight into podcasting, but be able to like either build a list or social media following or promote it, but keep it going as like something that's ongoing, if that makes sense. So yeah, for my purposes, I like to use it to be able to have guests on the show to increase the audience engagement, as well as like have like, you know, a lot of guest experts come on, but also be able to promote every now and then, so I can be able to sell some of my products and services, you know, for the right audience at the right time.
Excellent.
So speaking about your products and services, why don't you tell people a little bit what your products and services are and how can they connect with you, whether it's website, social media, that kind of thing.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Sure. So, well, if you want to connect with me, first of all, you can go to lorirochino.com and you'll see all my information as well. You'll find out about my podcast, Simply Design Like Podcast, where you could subscribe. There's also a link there to some of my services. So I do provide services for productivity. If you are, especially towards the end of the year, if you need help with clarity, I do have a particular offering where I can coach you, one-on-one, and we'll pick your burning problem that you have at the moment, and I'll help you get through some steps to get more organized and more productive and move forward in that direction. The other one I have is launching your podcast. This is pretty much for those who have a pretty much existing blog content, people who want to just like repurpose it in a podcast format. So you could definitely get connected with me on that. And you can email me at lori@lorirochino.com, and I can give you all the information. We'll just have a usually like when you know, before people come working with me, we just make sure that, you know, we're a right fit, and you know, I could definitely help you. And if I can't, then I'll suggest somebody else that would be in a better position as well. So I'm that kind of person.
Excellent. Excellent. So thank you very much, Lori. Jim, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, just thank you so much, Lori. It's a wealth of great tips and pointers, you know, and I think that other people could definitely get value from reaching out to you if they're wanting to get started in the podcast things. Like you said, it's going to continue to grow. You know, people have so much, I guess, going on in their lives that sometimes just to be able to listen to something is the way that they're going to consume content of value. And you definitely gave us some great value here today. So thank you for being on our show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
All right. Bye, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.